Thank you for your interest in the International Progressive MS Alliance and this request for applications focused on experimental medicine trials in progressive MS. My name is Doug Landsman, and I am the Vice President of Research at the National MS Society in the United States, and I will be leading the call today. This session is being recorded without applicants because we had some technical difficulties during our live teleconferences. We will address questions that were asked during the live calls, and we will also be posting a frequently asked questions document on the Alliance website alongside this recording. I am joined by my colleague Sarah Sternbach, Scientific Director of the International Progressive MS Alliance, and Dr. Bob Fox, Chair of the Alliance Scientific Steering Committee and a neurologist at the Cleveland Clinic. Over the next few minutes, Dr. Fox will provide a brief description of the Alliance and its mission, along with an introduction to experimental medicine trials. Sarah will then review the objectives of this RFA and discuss the application process and criteria, which will be used for review of the applications. As mentioned previously, additional questions will be addressed in an FAQ document on the website. Bob?
Well, thank you, Doug, and thank you to all of you for joining this program and learning about this funding announcement from the International Progressive MS Alliance. The Alliance is bringing the world together to stop progressive MS. It is well known to those viewing this program that MS affects over 2 million people worldwide, and is estimated that at least half of them will develop progressive MS at some point along their disease course. Treatment options for progressive MS are quite limited, making our mission of the utmost importance. That mission is to accelerate the development of effective treatments for people with progressive MS to improve quality of life worldwide. But let me step back for a moment and describe the Alliance. We're a global collaboration with a single goal: to end progressive MS. This collaboration includes 19 MS organizations, hundreds of researchers and health professionals, the pharmaceutical industry, companies, foundations, donors, and most importantly, people affected by progressive MS. To date, the Alliance has invested over 24 million euros in research, with an overall commitment of over 60 million euros over the next several years. We have conducted several funding calls over the years, including Collaborative Network Awards, Challenge Awards, and Wellbeing Awards. This current RFA is focused on experimental medicine trials, specifically early clinical trials that explore treatments and targets, while at the same time generating and testing hypotheses about disease mechanisms using biological, clinical, and performance-based measures. Importantly, these trials should be informative of the disease process, even in the event of a negative outcome. The goal of this funding initiative is to support innovative experimental medicine trials that advance our knowledge of disease pathophysiology by defining the underlying mechanisms of an intervention, mechanisms that drive progressive MS pathogenesis, and harmonizing outcome measures that correlate with clinical efficacy for any given intervention. So let me hand it over to Sarah, who will tell us more about this award mechanism. Sarah?
Thanks, Bob. I'm going to spend the next few minutes going over the details of the RFA, starting with the application pathways that the Alliance is offering. The top arm of the graphic illustrates a pipeline program that starts with a development award, actually feed into an application for an experimental medicine trial award. We did this because we recognize that not every group may be ready to take on a small trial. There could be a very promising avenue of work, but further validation studies in humans aren't done yet, or the group may need time to plan a multi-site trial. If you feel that this or any of the other examples that are listed within the RFA describe where your group is at with their work, then you should apply for a development award. These awards will provide up to 100,000 euros for up to 18 months of support. At the end of that 18-month period, investigators should be ready for and will be expected to submit a full experimental medicine trial application. If you don't think that your group can get there in 18 months, this funding opportunity is probably not for you at this point. However, for those groups that have maybe previously demonstrated strong target engagement and clinical efficacy with the therapy, or if they're really just ready to recruit patients and run a trial, they have all of their ducks in a row, you'll be following the bottom arm of this graphic and submitting directly for an experimental medicine trial award. These awards will provide support of up to €1.5 million for up to 3 years. Now I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into each of these funding arms, starting with the development awards. So again, these development awards are for planning and validation efforts to support future experimental medicine trials. Some examples of what the Alliance is looking to support include what's listed on the slide. So again, study design, conduct analysis, so maybe planning that multi-site implementation study, or studies that are related to therapeutic targets. So maybe validating target engagement, validating target measurements, and other studies that are really at the intersection of pathophysiology of progressive MS and a therapeutic mechanism of action. I also want to iterate here, as it's mentioned multiple times throughout the RFA, that all proposals have to be developed and informed by perspectives of people with MS. Informed patient perspectives educate us with respect to lived experience and inform our priorities and research questions. The Alliance is committed to fostering an inclusive scientific process that includes engaging patients throughout the research process to ensure we all have a greater impact. For full transparency, we are anticipating funding up to 10 development awards. We also want to take a moment to address eligibility because we've gotten a couple of questions. And so we're aware that some companies may be interested in applying for this opportunity. And we want to call out that this RFA is open to all researchers in academic, nonprofit, and commercial organizations, but a single principal investigator has to be at a public institution or nonprofit research organization, and that's who will be the project leader. These fund investigators can have subcontractors at other institutions or at commercial organizations, but at least 50% of the effort has to be done in that public institution or nonprofit research organization where the PI is located. I also want to call out, we had a question about this earlier about co-funding. The Alliance is open to co-funding opportunities with commercial organizations. We're also okay with investigators piggybacking on existing trials. Now I'm going to shift to talk a little bit about the development award application itself. The Alliance uses the National MS Society's online grant application platform. And so if you're not already registered with this website, you will need to register. The URL is shown on the screen, nmss.fluxx.io, and the website is active. I will note that if you are registering as a new user, please give our grant administration team 24 hours to approve your registration. And as general housekeeping, all applications should be submitted in English. I also want to address that this is a two-stage application process. And what this means is that there is a pre-application that all applicants have to submit. This pre-application is a short synopsis, about a paragraph or two, that describes the hypothesis and the specific aims of the project. The pre-application will be reviewed by the scientific staff, so Doug and myself, just to assure that the proposal is in alignment with the RFA and the mission of the Alliance. I'll note that pre-applications will be approved on a rolling basis. On the slide, you can see that the deadline for pre-applications is March 15th. We will not be waiting until March 15th to approve pre-applications. As they come in, we'll be reading them. So it's really in the best interest to get those in earlier rather than give yourself 2 weeks between pre-app deadline and a full application deadline to put together your full proposal. I'll note that pre-applications, they're not set in stone. Once you have submitted your pre-application and you're in the full application, if you want to make any changes to the scientific summary you've given, that is totally okay. So again, deadline for pre-application submission is Friday, March 15th, and full applications are due by Friday, March 29th at 5 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. The full application for the development award should include a 5-page proposal narrative, and this includes an overview of the proposed research, outcomes and deliverables, and a project timeline. We're also asking applicants to complete a plain language summary of the proposed project in language that's suitable for people without a scientific background. And you can find these questions on the application portal once you have access to the full application. We're also asking for a detailed budget with justification and bio sketches of all key collaborators on the project. And again, all of these forms and instructions are posted on the application portal. I want to take a moment here and address what investigators that receive development awards can expect as this 18-month award period ends. Again, as these are learning trials, the Alliance expects investigators to submit for an experimental medicine trial award or provide documentation for why submitting for this award is not warranted. So we understand that science doesn't always support our initial hypotheses. And we understand that sometimes maybe the mechanism that a group was exploring really wasn't what we were looking for, or the findings really weren't clinically relevant or significant. And we just want to know why or what happened, and so that everybody can learn from this. However, investigators that do have these clinically relevant and significant findings, which we do hope is everybody, will submit for a full experimental medicine trial award. And this will be due approximately 20 months from the start of the development award, providing about 2 months to write the full application, but more details will come as we get closer to this award period. Now we're going to move on to the bottom arm of the graphic and talk about the experimental medicine trial awards. So again, these awards are for up to 1.5 million euros for up to 3 years of support. And we wrote this RFA really drawing on the Alliance publication on experimental medicine trials that was published in 2021. And the Alliance is particularly interested in what you see listed here in our trials, which would include the use of polytherapies or treating on a background of immunosuppression, or the harmonization of outcome measures between biological, paraclinical efficacy markers, et cetera. But I want to note here that the Alliance really does not want to be too prescriptive, and we want to welcome innovation. And so these really are suggestions, and we want to encourage you to think about this RFA as a chance to think outside of the box from what we're currently doing in the field of progressive MS. I'm also going to note, as was mentioned in the RFA, the Alliance is willing to support studies that use patient samples from existing trials or registries to study basic mechanisms of a therapy or a disease pathogenesis. So you don't need to go out necessarily and launch your own trial if you have an idea and can access another study's registry. I want to emphasize that all proposals, including development awards, should provide mechanistic insights that advance our understanding of disease pathophysiology. So again, these are learning trials and these are mechanistic trials. And so proposals that are focused on the development of a new outcome measure without tethering to a pathophysiologic mechanism, or a large-scale transcriptomic study that doesn't address a biological response, would be considered out of scope for this RFA and not considered. And again, I'm emphasizing this on purpose. All proposals have to be developed in consultation with people affected by MS, especially with regard to trial design and execution. As a reminder, pre-applications for the full experimental medicine trial proposals have to be submitted by March 15th. The components of this full application and the experimental medicine trial application are similar to the development award, except here we're asking for a 10-page proposal, research narrative, just to allow for space for some additional background information, experimental methodologies, and a study recruitment plan. And full applications have to be submitted 5 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time by March 29th. And now I'm going to briefly discuss the review process for these awards. The development and experimental medicine trial proposals that are submitted are going to be reviewed at the same time in the same way. Every application is going to undergo external scientific peer review, as well as review by the Alliance Industry Forum members. The plain language summaries that are submitted are going to be reviewed by the Alliance's People Affected by MS Engagement Coordination Team. And then the Alliance Scientific Steering Committee is going to be that final step in the review process, in the scientific review process, before proposals are recommended to the executive committee. Across the board, applications will be reviewed for what you can see listed on the slide, as well as in the RFA, also taking into account the scientific potential for novelty and innovation, expertise of the investigators, and the appropriateness of the research environment. Experimental trial applications will also be reviewed for their trial methodologies. We're anticipating wrapping up the review process in early December and notifying applicants of outcomes shortly thereafter, and anticipate funding to begin in February of 2025. This takes us to the end of our prepared slide remarks, and now I'm going to pass it back to Doug to moderate for some questions.
Terrific. Thanks, Bob and Sarah. Yeah, so now we thought we'd take a couple minutes to address questions that were asked during our live calls. And again, I'll note we're also going to be posting an FAQ document alongside this recording. So the first question, Sarah, you addressed this, but we'll say it again, is co-funding allowed?
Yes, co-funding is definitely allowed. If you have an industry collaborator in mind, please let us know as we get closer to the award period or when we're working on award agreement so that we can work with them.
Terrific.
I would also add that one can submit to other agencies, other peer review agencies for additional funding. It makes it a little bit tricky because you're then relying upon that funding, and that makes it a little bit harder to figure things out. But peer review funding from another agency is also allowed, even if it's still pending.
So, Bob, I'll use that as a segue to the next question. Is this mechanism coordinated with funding mechanisms? That is, have we are we working with NIH or other agencies directly?
So this is not coordinated with other agencies directly. This RFA was derived from our own internal brainstorming and looking at the landscape and identifying the largest unmet needs. That said, there are many other award mechanisms in various areas around the world. So investigators may have access to different funding mechanisms, and they are welcome to combine those applications. Now, overlap in funding will have to get worked out if both were awarded, and so we would figure that out on the back end. But although this hasn't been developed in concert with other grant applications, with other award mechanisms, we do welcome collaboration with other agencies.
Terrific. So, Bob, I have a series of questions that are going to come your way. So, are phase 1 trials allowed?
So phase 1 trials are definitely allowed, but there's an important asterisk after that. And that is the very earliest stage of phase 1 trials, the pure safety. Let's make sure we're not harming patients, injuring patients, activating MS disease and things like that. That is less exciting and less innovative, and is not likely to do as well in peer review as phase 1 trials that are looking at a specific mechanism, that are trying to identify and validate certain targets, certain pathways, and validating certain measures, whether they're fluid measures or imaging measures or electrophysiologic measures. So yes, phase 1 trials are allowed, but the more competitive ones, the more exciting ones, are the ones that are not just looking at safety, which is of course a part of phase 1 trials, but also looking at some mechanistic response. Is the needle moving? And you, of course, have to demonstrate to peer review that the needle you're measuring is a relevant needle to measure for progressive MS.
Okay, so let's go back in time a little bit. Are preclinical studies supported through this award mechanism?
So, Sarah, you want to take that one?
Yes. So it's important to consider how we're defining a preclinical study. This specific funding call is not for animal studies or for preclinical toxicity studies. When we talk about the development award portion of this funding call, we're talking about assembling a network to run a trial, perhaps, and validating some outcome measures, so biologic or imaging or electrophysiologic measures. Or again, when we're talking about target engagement, so validating that target engagement or a target measurement. So it depends on how you are looking at it through the preclinical lens, but overall, yes, but beyond animal studies.
Perfect. This is going to be the final question, Bob. Is there a target population for this RFA? That is this limited to traditional PPMS and SPMS, or does it go beyond that?
So in short, no, this is not limited to the traditional phenotypic definition of secondary progressive and primary progressive MS. The Alliance recognizes the shifting landscape and understanding of progressive MS, and how progressive MS probably starts much earlier in the MS disease course than patients tell us, than patients are even aware of things happening. And so, as an organization, the Alliance embraces a wider view of what is progressive MS. Now, that said, the Alliance is not looking to study mechanisms of focal inflammation that is typical in relapsing MS. So the focal inflammation aspect, the new lesions and GAD lesions and MRI, they can be seen in progressive MS, of course, but that is not the focus of this experimental trials mechanism, but is really on the progressive aspects of progressive MS and developing therapies and understanding biologic pathways that are directly related to the progressive aspects of progressive MS.
Fantastic. Bob and Sarah, thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you all for your interest in the International Progressive MS Alliance. We welcome you to contact us with any questions that were not addressed in this recording, and we look forward to receiving your applications. Have a great day.
Thank you all.